The diplomatic station orbited the neutral moon of Kepler, 442c, a massive structure of gleaming metal and crystal that housed representatives from dozens of species across the galaxy. I walked through its corridors with the practiced ease of someone who had spent 3 years navigating alien politics, my human-issued diplomatic uniform marking me as one of the few Terran representatives in this corner of space. The Zephyrian delegation had arrived that morning, their ship a work of art that made our human vessels look like flying scrap metal. Princess Lyralii stepped off the transport with a grace that only came from generations of royal breeding, her crystalline skin catching the station's artificial light and throwing rainbows across the docking bay. She stood nearly 8 feet tall, her people's trademark elongated limbs moving with fluid precision as she surveyed her new surroundings. I had been briefed on her arrival, of course. Princess Lyralii was third in line to the Zephyrian throne, a race known throughout the galaxy for their advanced technology and their belief in their own superiority. They had been part of the Galactic Coalition for over 2 centuries, long before humanity had even discovered faster-than-light travel. Their ships could cross the galaxy in days while ours took months. Their weapons could crack planets while ours barely scratched their shields. Yet here I was, assigned as her cultural liaison during the peace talks between the Zephyrians and the aggressive Krex Empire. It should have been an honor, but I knew better. The other species saw humans as useful tools, nothing more. We were the mediators, the ones who could talk to anyone because we weren't considered threatening enough to matter. The first few days passed without incident. Princess Lyralii attended the formal sessions with the other delegates, her melodic voice contributing to discussions about trade routes and territorial disputes. I noticed she often glanced in my direction during meetings, those large, opalescent eyes studying me with an intensity one couldn't quite understand. When our eyes met, I would nod politely and then look away, focusing on my notes or the other speakers. During break periods, she would approach other delegates, engaging them in conversations that seemed to flow naturally. I watched her charm a gruff draconian ambassador with questions about his homeworld volcanic poetry, and saw her discuss quantum mechanics with the Etherian scientist whose gaseous form shimmered with excitement at finding someone who could follow his theories. But, with me, she maintained a formal distance. When protocol required our interaction, our conversations remained strictly professional. I would provide cultural context about human customs when relevant to the negotiations, answer direct questions about Earth's position on various matters, and ensure she had everything needed for her comfort during her stay. I thought this arrangement worked well for both of us. I had learned long ago that getting too close to alien royalty was a mistake that could end a diplomatic career. The galaxy's power structures were ancient and complex, with humans being relative newcomers who were tolerated rather than respected. Keeping professional boundaries wasn't just smart, it was survival. The turning point came during the 5th day of negotiations. The talks had grown heated as the Krex representatives demanded territorial concessions that would have given them control over 3-star systems rich in rare minerals. Princess Lyralii had been advocating for a compromise that would establish shared mining rights, but the Krex ambassador, a hulking creature covered in chitinous armor, had dismissed her proposal with contempt. "The Zephyrians have grown soft," he declared, his voice echoing through the chamber like grinding metal. "Your people hide behind their technology and pretty words while others take what they need through strength." The insult hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably, knowing that such words had started wars between species in the past. Princess Lyralii's crystalline skin darkened slightly, a sign of anger among her people, but her voice remained controlled. "Strength without wisdom leads only to destruction," she replied. "The Krex Empire's expansion has left a trail of dead worlds behind it." The Krex ambassador leaned forward, his massive claws scraping against the table. "Better dead worlds than weak worlds that contribute nothing to galactic civilization." It was then that I made my mistake. Perhaps it was the months of watching these so-called superior species squabble like children, or maybe it was the condescending way the Krex ambassador had spoken about strength while sitting in a station protected by human-brokered peace treaties. Whatever the reason, I found myself speaking before I could stop myself. Funny words coming from a species that needed human mediators to avoid destroying themselves in the 7th Sector War. The chamber fell silent. Every eye turned to me, and I realized I had just committed a massive diplomatic blunder. The Crex ambassador's compound eyes fixed on me with murderous intent, while other delegates looked shocked that a human had dared to speak so boldly. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Ambassador Crexthull's mandibles clicked ominously as he processed my words, and I could practically feel my diplomatic career evaporating in real time. The other delegates looked between us like spectators at a gladiatorial match, waiting to see who would make the first move. "You dare speak of strength, little human?" Crexthull's voice was low and dangerous. "Your species has existed in space for barely a century. We have conquered systems while your people were still discovering fire. I should have apologized immediately, should have backed down, and let the senior diplomats handle the situation. But something in his tone, that casual dismissal of humanity's achievements, made my blood boil. We had been mediating conflicts for decades, preventing wars that would have cost millions of lives. And this was the thanks we got? "Conquest isn't the same as strength," I replied, somehow managing to keep my voice steady. "The Crex Empire has been conquering for 3,000 years, and what do you have to show for it? 50 dead worlds, 2 civil wars, and a reputation that makes half the galaxy cross to the other side of space when they see your ships coming." Crexthull's claws extended fully, each one the length of my forearm and sharp enough to cut through steel. Several delegates began backing away from the table, clearly expecting violence to erupt at any moment. The station's security protocols would kick in soon, but that wouldn't matter much if the Crex ambassador decided to make his point with physical force. "You forget yourself, human," he growled. "Your species exists at our sufferance. One word from me, and the Crex fleet could turn your precious Earth into cosmic dust." That's when Princess Lyralii stood up. Her 8-foot frame cast a long shadow across the table as she placed herself between Crexthull and me, her crystalline skin now glowing with an inner light that made the air around her hum with energy. "Ambassador Crexthull," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone born to rule, "are you threatening to commit genocide in front of the Galactic Council? Because that would be a violation of approximately 47 interstellar treaties and would result in the immediate mobilization of coalition forces against your empire." The Crex ambassador's compound eyes shifted from me to the princess, calculating odds and consequences. Whatever he saw in her expression made him slowly retract his claws, though his posture remained aggressive. "I was merely pointing out the natural order of things," he said carefully. "Some species lead, others follow." "Yes," Princess Lyralii agreed, her tone deceptively pleasant. "And the species that lead are the ones that can see beyond the narrow scope of their own immediate desires. Which is why this human just demonstrated more leadership potential in 5 minutes than your empire has shown in the last 3 centuries. Now, it was my turn to be shocked. Princess Lyralii was defending me, and in doing so, she was essentially declaring that humans were superior to the Crex in at least one important way. Such a statement from Zephyrian royalty carried enormous weight in galactic politics, and everyone in the room knew it. The rest of the session passed in a blur of formal procedures and careful diplomatic language, but the real work was already done. Crexthull's position had been fundamentally undermined, and the other delegates began to see the human perspective as more valuable than they had previously assumed. When the session ended, I found myself walking quickly toward my quarters, hoping to avoid any further diplomatic incidents. I had caused enough trouble for one day, and I needed time to think about how to minimize the damage to human-Crex relations. But Princess Lyralii's voice stopped me in the corridor. "Ambassador Chun, a word?" I turned to find her approaching with that fluid grace that seemed to make her glide rather than walk. Up close, I could see the intricate patterns in her crystalline skin, like living fractals that shifted and moved with each breath she took. "Your Highness," I said, giving the formal bow that Zephyrian protocol required. "I want to apologize for my outburst in there. It was unprofessional and could damage human-Crex relations." She tilted her head, studying me with those opalescent eyes. "Why did you speak up?" The question caught me off guard. It was a mistake, Your Highness. I allowed my emotions to override my judgment." "That's not what I asked," she said, stepping closer. "I asked why you spoke up. What made you risk your career to contradict a Crex ambassador?" I hesitated, unsure how to answer. The truth was complicated, involving years of frustration at watching humanity treated as junior partners in a galaxy that depended on our diplomatic skills while dismissing our contributions. I suppose I was tired of being dismissed, I said finally. Humans have prevented 17 major conflicts in the last 50 years, but we're still treated like children playing at politics. Princess Lyralii nodded slowly, as if I had confirmed something she already suspected. And that's exactly why I've been trying to get your attention for the past 5 days. I blinked in surprise. I'm sorry, Your Highness. You've been avoiding me, she said matter-of-factly. Not obviously, not rudely, but carefully maintaining distance whenever possible. At first, I thought it was simple professionalism, but your behavior went beyond proper protocol. She wasn't wrong. I had been careful to limit our interactions to official business only, always finding reasons to excuse myself when conversations threatened to become personal. Why? She asked, her voice gentle but insistent. Why have you been avoiding me? I stood in the corridor, acutely aware of the passing delegates who were now openly staring at the sight of Zephyrian royalty in deep conversation with a human diplomat. Princess Lyralii seemed oblivious to the attention, her opalescent eyes focused entirely on me as she waited for my answer to her question. Your Highness, I began carefully, I've maintained appropriate professional distance, as befits our respective positions. She made a sound that could have been laughter if Zephyrians laughed the way humans did. That's a diplomat's answer, Ambassador Chun. I'm asking for the truth. The truth. How could I explain to an alien princess that humans had learned to avoid getting too close to the galaxy's elite? That every species in the coalition treated us as useful tools rather than equals? That I had watched too many human diplomats ruin their careers by mistaking professional courtesy for genuine friendship? The truth is complicated, Your Highness. Then, let's find somewhere private to discuss complicated truths, she said, gesturing toward a nearby observation lounge. Unless you have urgent business elsewhere? I didn't, and we both knew it. The observation lounge was empty at this hour, its transparent aluminum walls offering a view of the nebula that surrounded Kepler 442c. The swirling clouds of purple and gold gas created a backdrop that was both beautiful and alien, much like the princess herself. She settled onto one of the Zephyrian-sized chairs with fluid grace, while I took a human-proportioned seat across from her. The size difference was even more pronounced sitting down, but she somehow managed to make it feel conversational rather than intimidating. Now, she said, tell me why you've been avoiding me. I looked out at the nebula, gathering my thoughts. How do you explain a lifetime of lessons learned through bitter experience? How do you tell someone who was born to rule that your species has learned to expect disappointment? Because it never ends well for my people, I said finally. What doesn't end well? Getting close to galactic royalty. Getting attached. Believing that friendship is possible between humans and the species that actually matter in this galaxy. Princess Lyralii's skin shifted to a deeper blue, which I had learned indicated concern among her people. You think I would hurt you deliberately? Not deliberately, I replied, but inevitably. Look, Your Highness, I've been doing this job for 8 years. I've seen human diplomats form what they thought were genuine relationships with alien dignitaries, only to discover they were seen as amusing pets or useful tools. Nothing more. I turned to face her directly, suddenly, tired of diplomatic caution. Humans are good at reading people, at understanding motivations and emotions. It's what makes us effective mediators. But it also means we can see when someone is genuinely interested in us as individuals versus when they're just being polite to the help. And you believe I'm being polite to the help. The question was asked without anger or offense, just genuine curiosity. It made my answer harder to give. I believe you're curious about humans because we're different. Exotic maybe, but your people have been exploring the galaxy for 2,000 years while we've been spacefaring for less than a century. In 10 years, when the novelty wears off, you'll remember this conversation as an amusing anecdote about the quaint human who thought he understood galactic politics. Princess Lyralii was quiet for a long moment, her crystalline features catching the light from the nebula outside. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. Do you know what happened during the Andromedan crisis 15 years ago? I nodded. It was required reading for all human diplomats. The Andromedan Syndicate had attempted to invade our galaxy through a series of artificial wormholes, bringing with them weapons and tactics that the Coalition had never seen before. It had taken the combined fleets of 12 species to drive them back. My older brother commanded the Zephyrian battle fleet, she continued. 18,000 ships, each one carrying technology that could reshape solar systems. The pride of our military, led by the crown prince of our empire. I remember, I said. The Zephyrian fleet was instrumental in closing the wormholes. The Zephyrian fleet was destroyed in the first engagement, she corrected. Completely. My brother and every ship under his command were wiped out in less than 6 hours because the Andromedians had weapons we had never imagined and tactics we couldn't comprehend. The pain in her voice was unmistakable, and I felt a stab of sympathy for her loss. But I wasn't sure where she was going with this. The Coalition fleets regrouped, she continued, and prepared for a counterattack using conventional strategies. Ship-to-ship combat, overwhelming firepower, the tactics that had worked for centuries. Do you know what happened? The second wave was also defeated, I said, remembering the casualty reports from that dark time. Exactly. And the third. The Andromedians were adapting faster than we could develop new strategies. Our admirals were thinking like their own species, using the same approaches that had made them successful for millennia. It wasn't working. She stood up and moved to the observation window, her tall frame silhouetted against the nebula's glow. Then someone suggested bringing in the human advisors, not as leaders, but as observers, to watch the Andromedian tactics and offer perspectives that our military minds couldn't see. I frowned. I don't remember reading about human involvement in the strategic planning. Because it was classified for obvious reasons, she said. Can you imagine the political implications if it became known that the mighty Coalition fleets had needed guidance from humanity to defeat an external threat? She turned back to face me, her opalescent eyes reflecting the nebula's colors. The human observers spent 3 days studying Andromedian battle footage. 3 days. Then, they submitted a tactical analysis that changed everything. They identified patterns our greatest military minds had missed, weaknesses in formations that we had seen as strengths, and psychological factors that our logical approach to warfare had completely ignored. My mouth fell dry. I had never heard this version of events. The fourth wave of attacks used human-design tactics, Princess Lyralii continued. Modified, of course, to account for our superior technology and firepower. But the core strategies, the fundamental approach to engaging an unknown enemy, came from human military doctrine. The silence in the observation lounge felt heavy with the weight of revelation. I stared at Princess Lyralii, trying to process what she had just told me. The official histories of the Andromedian crisis mentioned human support roles, but nothing about tactical planning or strategic influence. The Andromedians were routed in the fourth wave, she continued, returning to her seat. Not just defeated, but completely broken as a fighting force. Their invasion fleet was destroyed so thoroughly that they've never attempted another incursion into our galaxy. Why are you telling me this? I asked, though part of me already suspected the answer. Because you need to understand why my people, and specifically my family, view humanity differently than the rest of the galaxy does. My brother died because our military leaders couldn't adapt their thinking to face an unknown threat. He lived just long enough to send a final transmission recommending the human tactical advisors be brought in for future engagements. She leaned forward, her crystalline skin shifting to a warmer golden hue. His last words were about human potential, about how your species sees patterns and possibilities that we miss because we're trapped by our own superiority. The irony wasn't lost on me. Prince Lyralii's brother had died recognizing exactly what I had been arguing about human contributions to galactic civilization. So, when I was assigned to these peace talks, she continued, and learned that the human cultural liaison would be present, I saw it as an opportunity to understand your people better, to see for myself what my brother recognized in his final moments. And what have you concluded? I asked. That you're brilliant at reading other species, but terrible at recognizing your own worth. The bluntness of her statement caught me off guard. Your Highness, You've spent this entire week demonstrating exactly the qualities that make humans valuable to the galaxy. You mediated the dispute between the Etherian delegation and the Crystalline Collective without either side realizing they had been manipulated into agreement. You defused the trade route conflict by finding a solution that none of the original negotiators had considered. And today you saw through Krexthol's posturing in a way that let me expose his weakness without starting a war. I had done those things, but I hadn't thought of them as particularly impressive. They were just a job. Yet you've been avoiding me because you assume I see you as an amusing curiosity, she continued. You've been so focused on maintaining professional distance that you failed to notice I was trying to learn from you. Learn from me. The concept seemed absurd. Your Highness, your people have technology we can barely comprehend. Your ships cross the galaxy in days while ours take months. Your weapons can crack planets. What could I possibly teach you? How to think like prey instead of predators. The answer stopped me cold. Princess Lyraliai's expression was serious, almost solemn. Every species in the coalition, including mine, evolved as apex predators on their homeworlds. We think like hunters, like conquerors. We see problems as things to be overcome through superior strength or technology. But humans evolved as persistence hunters, as social problem solvers who had to cooperate to survive against creatures stronger and faster than yourselves. She gestured toward the nebula outside. Do you see the gas cloud? A Zephyrian would study its composition and figure out how to harvest its resources. A Krex would evaluate it as a potential hiding place for enemy fleets. A Draconian would compose poetry about its beauty. But a human would look at it and wonder what it tells us about the stellar formation process in this region and how that knowledge might prevent future conflicts over colonization rights. That's just practical thinking, I protested. Exactly. Practical, adaptive, long-term thinking that considers consequences beyond immediate goals. It's why humans make such effective mediators and why the Andromedian tactical analysis worked so well. Your species doesn't just solve problems. You solve problems in ways that prevent bigger problems from developing. I found myself thinking about the peace talks, about all the small compromises and creative solutions that had kept various species from escalating minor disputes into major conflicts. Was she right? Did humans really think differently than the galaxy's other species? So when I ask why you've been avoiding me, Princess Lyraliai continued, I'm not asking as a member of galactic royalty who expects deference. I'm asking as someone who recognizes that your species has something mine lacks, and who is hoping to understand it better through friendship rather than formal diplomacy. Friendship. The word hung between us like a bridge I was afraid to cross. Your Highness, I began, then stopped. Lyraliai, I need you to understand something about humans. We form attachments easily, and when those attachments are broken, it hurts in ways that can affect our entire species' relationship with yours. She tilted her head, waiting for me to explain. 50 years ago, a human diplomat named Sarah Chun, my grandmother, actually formed what she thought was a genuine friendship with a vegan noble during the Outer Rim negotiations. She trusted him completely, shared human cultural insights that helped broker a major trade agreement. Then, she discovered he had been recording their conversations and selling them to competitors as intelligence about human negotiating tactics. The memory still stung, even secondhand. My grandmother never served as a diplomat again. She couldn't trust her own judgment anymore. And the incident led to protocols that kept humans at arm's length from other species for decades. Princess Lyraliai's skin darkened with what I now recognized as anger. He used her friendship as a weapon against her own people. Yes, and it's not an isolated incident. Humans are good at reading emotions and motivations, but we're also inclined to project our own values onto others. We assume good faith because that's how we operate, and we get burned for it. So you avoid connections entirely rather than risk disappointment. It sounded cowardly when she said it that way, but it was essentially accurate. It's safer, for me personally and for human interests in general. Princess Lyraliai stood and moved back to the observation window, gazing out at the swirling nebula. When she spoke again, her voice was soft but clear. My brother's name was Kairos. He loved ancient Earth music, particularly something called jazz. He used to say that jazz was the perfect example of how chaos and order could coexist, how individual expression could enhance group harmony rather than disrupting it. She turned to face me, her opalescent eyes reflecting the nebula's light. Kairos believed that humans represented something unique in the galaxy, a species that had achieved spaceflight not through conquest or dominance, but through cooperation and shared purpose. He thought that if the coalition could learn to think like humans, we could solve problems we didn't even know we had. And you think he was right? I think he died before he could find out. But I also think that avoiding the possibility of friendship because someone might misuse it is exactly the kind of thinking that got my people trapped in our own superiority in the first place. I sat in the observation lounge for a long time after Princess Lyralii left, watching the nebula shift and flow beyond the transparent walls. Her words echoed in my mind, challenging assumptions I had held for years about humanity's place in the galaxy and the nature of the relationships we could form with other species. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Ambassador Krexthal had withdrawn from the negotiations entirely, claiming that the talks had been compromised by inappropriate human interference. His departure left the other Krex delegates in an awkward position, unsure whether to continue without their leader's authority. But something unexpected happened. Instead of following their ambassador's lead and abandoning the negotiations, the remaining Krex representatives approached me directly. Their translator, a younger Krex named Veltar who had been silent throughout the previous sessions, requested a private meeting. Ambassador Chun, Veltar began, his mandibles clicking nervously. We would like to continue these negotiations, but without Ambassador Krexthal's aggressive approach. I was surprised by the request. That's certainly possible, but you'll need authorization from your government to negotiate without your chief ambassador. We have been in communication with the Krex Council since yesterday's incident. Another delegate, Zexhai, explained. The Council is concerned that Krexthal's behavior may have damaged our standing with the Coalition. They have authorized us to proceed with a more cooperative approach. What they were really saying was that the Krex government had been embarrassed by their ambassador's threats and wanted to salvage the situation. It was a significant victory for human diplomatic methods, though I kept that observation to myself. The revised negotiations proceeded smoothly over the following days. Without Krexthal's aggressive posturing, the remaining delegates were able to focus on practical solutions rather than power displays. Princess Lyralii and I worked together to develop a framework that addressed everyone's core concerns while avoiding the territorial disputes that had stalled previous talks. I found myself genuinely enjoying our collaboration. Lyralii's strategic thinking complemented my understanding of interspecies psychology, and together we crafted agreements that were both politically viable and practically workable. More importantly, I began to see her as a person rather than just a representative of her species. She was incredibly intelligent, with an intuitive grasp of complex systems that reminded me of the best human theorists I had known. But she was also curious in a way that seemed distinctly unroyal, asking detailed questions about human culture and philosophy that went far beyond diplomatic necessity. On the final day of negotiations, as we were putting the finishing touches on the trade agreements that would govern relations between the Zephyrian Empire and the Krex territories, she made an observation that stopped me in my tracks. You know, she said, reviewing the final documents, these accords don't just solve the immediate territorial disputes. They create a framework for handling similar conflicts throughout this entire sector. Any species that joins the agreement gains access to the same mediation processes and resource-sharing protocols. She was right. Without consciously planning it, we had designed a system that could prevent dozens of potential conflicts while establishing trade relationships that would benefit everyone involved. It was exactly the kind of long-term thinking that Princess Lyralii had identified as distinctly human. It's what my people would call a persistent solution, I said. Something that keeps working even after the original problem is solved. Yes, but it's more than that. Look at the implementation timeline. The economic benefits start small, but compound over time, which means every species has incentives to maintain the peace even if their initial motivations change. It's brilliant. I looked at the documents with fresh eyes and realized she was right. We hadn't just negotiated a peace treaty. We had created a self-sustaining system that would grow stronger over time. We make a good team, Princess Lyralii said, and There was something in her tone that made me look up from the papers. Yes, we do, I agreed. David, she said, using my first name for the first time, I have a proposition for you. The use of my personal name sent a small thrill through me, though I try to keep my expression neutral. I am listening. The Zephyrian Empire is planning to expand our diplomatic corps. We want to establish permanent embassy posts in several sectors that have been underserved by traditional coalition diplomacy. Regions where territorial disputes and resource conflicts have been festering for decades because no one has been able to broker lasting solutions. She paused, studying my reaction. We would like you to head the program. I blinked in surprise. Me? Your Highness, I'm honored, but I'm a human diplomat. Your people would never accept. My people would accept someone who has just demonstrated the ability to solve problems that have stumped the galaxy's best negotiators for years, she interrupted. The Zephyrian Council has been following these negotiations closely. They're impressed by the results, and they want to apply similar methods to other conflicts. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance to prove that your brother Kairos was right about human potential, to show the galaxy that cooperation can achieve things that dominance never could. The offer was tempting, incredibly so, to work directly with the Zephyrian Diplomatic Corps, to have access to their resources and technology while maintaining human approaches to problem-solving could revolutionize how conflicts were resolved throughout this sector of space. But there was something else in her offer, something unspoken that made my heart race. Will I be working with you directly? I asked. Princess Lyralii smiled, the first completely unguarded expression I had seen from her. I was hoping you would. I've learned more about effective diplomacy in the past week than I did in 3 years of formal training. I think we could do important work together. Lyralii, I said carefully, are you asking me to be your professional partner or something more? Her crystalline features shifted to a warm golden hue that I had learned indicated happiness among her people. I'm asking you to be my friend, David. My colleague and my friend. If something more develops over time, well, we'll see what happens. I thought about my grandmother's experience, about all the warnings I had received about getting too close to alien royalty. Then, I thought about Princess Lyralii's brother, dying in space while recognizing something special in humanity that his own people had missed. Yes, I said. I accept. Her smile brightened the entire room. Excellent. There's a transport leaving for the Zephyrian capital tomorrow. I'll arrange for you to have full diplomatic credentials and access to our cultural databases. You'll need time to prepare for the role. As we finalized the details of my new position, I realized that something fundamental had changed in how I saw myself and humanity's place in the galaxy. We weren't junior partners or useful tools. We were collaborators with something valuable to contribute. And for the first time in my diplomatic career, I was looking forward to finding out what we might accomplish when we stopped being afraid of our own potential. The transport to Zephyr Prime departed the next morning, carrying both Princess Lyralii and myself toward what I hoped would be a new chapter in human-alien relations. As we watched the diplomatic station shrink in the viewport behind us, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. David, may I ask you something? Of course. What made you change your mind? About avoiding connections, I considered the question carefully. I realized that you were right about humans thinking like prey instead of predators. We're so afraid of being hurt that we sometimes forget we might be missing out on something wonderful. And now, I looked out at the stars ahead of us, bright with possibility. Now I think it's worth the risk.